Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring scams. Volume 2. Membership Drive by Murray F. Yaco. The Satellite Keeper's Daughter by Mark Reinsberg. A Zloor for Your Trouble by Mack Reynolds. The Delegate from Venus by Henry Slesar. Grifters, Asteroid by H. L. Gold. Membership Drive by Murray F. Yaco. Originally published in Amazing, July 1960. Narrated by Tom Trussel. 30 million miles out, Keita began monitoring the planet's radio and television networks. He kept the vigil for 2 sleepless days and nights, then turned off the receivers and began a systematic study of the notes he had taken on English idioms and irregular verbs. 12 hours later, convinced that there would be no language difficulty, he left the control room, went into his cabin, and fell into bed. He remained there for 16 hours. When he awoke, he walked to a locker at the end of his cabin, opened the door, and carefully selected clothing from a wardrobe that was astonishing both for its size and variety. For headdress, he selected a helmet that was not too different in design from the space helmets he had viewed on a number of television programs. It would disappoint no one, Keita reflected happily, as he took a deep breath and blew an almost imperceptible film of dust from the helmet's iridescent finish. Trousers and blouse were little more of a problem, but finally a compromise on items of a distinct military cut. Both were black and unembellished, providing, he hoped, an ascetic, spiritual tone to temper the military aura. Boots were no problem at all. The black and silver pair he wore every day were, by happy coincidence, a synthesis of the cowboy and military footgear styling he had observed hour after weary hour on the pickup panel in the control room. He placed the helmet carefully on his head, took time to make sure that it did not hide too great a portion of his impressively high forehead, then walked leisurely to the control room. In the control room, he checked the relative position of 2 green lights on the navigation panel, shut off the main drives, clicked the view screen up to maximum magnification, and took over the manual controls. A little less than 2 hours later, at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, he landed smoothly and quietly near the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. Watching from a port in the airlock, Keita was impressed with the restraint of the reception committee. Obviously, the entire city had been alerted several hours before his arrival. Now, only orderly files of military equipment could be seen on the city's streets, converging cautiously toward the gleaming white hull and its lone occupant. He opened the airlock and stepped out on a small platform which held him a full 100 feet above the grass-covered park. He watched as an armored vehicle approached within shouting distance, then stopped. Telling himself that it was now or never, he raised both arms to the sky, a gesture which spoke eloquently, he hoped, of peace, friendship, and trust. Later that afternoon, behind locked doors and sitting somewhere near the middle of an enormous conference table, Keita nonchalantly confessed to an excited gathering of public officials that he had landed on the planet by accident. It was not, he implied, a very happy accident. "I didn't know where the hell I was," he explained carelessly, in excellent English that awesomely contained the suggestion of a Midwestern twang. "Some kind of trouble with the ship's computer, if you know what a computer is." He suppressed a yawn with the back of his hand and continued, "Anyway, the thing will repair itself by morning, and I'll get out of your hair. Too bad I had to land in a populated area and stir up so much fuss, but from the ship this place looked more like an abandoned rock quarry than a city. Now, if it's okay with you, I'll get back to the ship and—" A senator, Fillmore by name, at the opposite end of the table, jumped to his feet. "You mean you had no intention of contacting us? My God, man, don't you realize what this means to us? For the first time, we have proof that we're not alone in the universe. You can't just—" Keita called for silence with an impatient wave of his hand. "Come, gentlemen. You're not the only other humanoid race in the galaxy. We don't have time to call on every undeveloped race we happen to run across. Besides, I never did like playing the role of the mysterious alien who appears unannounced from outer space. Primitives always require so much explanation." "Primitives?" exploded the senator. "Why, of all the impudent—" The senator was quieted by a colleague who placed his hand over the offended man's mouth. The presiding officer at the meeting, a General Beamish, arose and addressed the visitor. "We realize that from your point of view this planet has not exactly achieved the cultural or technological level of your, homeland." "You said a mouthful," agreed Keita, who was now cleaning his nails with a pin attached to a United Nations emblem that somebody had stuck to his tunic earlier in the day. "Look," said the general, gamely trying again, "we're not quite as unsophisticated as you seem to think. There are 3 billion persons on this planet, persons who are well-fed, reasonably well-educated, persons who owe allegiance to only one government. We're making great strides technologically, too. Within a decade, we'll be established on the moon, our satellite. Why, even our school children are space-minded." "Sure," said Keita, who had turned in his chair and was now staring out the window. "Nice little place you got here. Say, is there a bathroom around this place? I gotta—" Someone showed the visitor to a bathroom, where to everyone's astonishment he proceeded to remove his clothes and leisurely shower. The meeting was adjourned for 30 minutes. When he had finished his shower, he dressed, walked back into the conference room, waved a cheery goodbye, and before anyone realized what was happening, he had unlocked the door from the inside and closed it behind him. For a full 30 seconds, no one said anything. Then suddenly someone managed to gasp, "My God, what'll we do?" "There's nothing we can do," said General Beamish. There were tears in his eyes. Keita walked all the way back to the ship. It took him 1 hour and 40 minutes, long enough, he hoped, for someone to have scooted ahead and notified the military personnel guarding the area to keep hands off. No one attempted to stop him. He boarded the ship, made himself something to eat, walked to a stockroom and pocketed a defective transistor from an unemptied disposal tube in a corner. 5 minutes later, he reappeared on the platform outside of the airlock. 15 minutes later, he was delivered in a military staff car to the conference room he had left barely 2 hours before. Everyone was transfigured by his reappearance. Beamish looked especially radiant as Keita sat down at the table, pulled the transistor from his pocket, and stated his business quickly. "Look, it's probably no use asking, but I need a repair part for that damned computer. Something's wrong with the automatic repair circuits, and I don't feel like staying up all night to find the trouble." He held the transistor toward them at arm's length. "Frankly, I don't think you'll have much luck reproducing it, but I thought I'd ask anyway." "May I see it?" asked Beamish, leaning forward and eagerly stretching out a hand. Keita seemed to hesitate for a minute, then shrugged his shoulders and dropped the transistor into the general's sweating palm. 3 persons got up from the table and crowded around Beamish, trying to get a look at the alien product. "Well," said Keita, "what do you think? If it's too far advanced for you, don't hesitate to say so. I'll just get back to the ship and start working." Not at all," said a small, white-haired man who had finally wrested the transistor from Beamish. He squinted at the thing through a pocket magnifier. "We'll have it for you by morning, I'm quite sure." "I'm not quite so sure," said Keita, yawning, "but I need the sleep anyway. See you here at 8 in the morning." He yawned again, got up from the table, and walked out once more through the door. When Keita reappeared in the morning, Beamish ushered him into the conference room with a hearty clap on the back. When everyone was seated, he pulled a small jewel box from a pocket and handed it ceremoniously to Keita. "I already ate breakfast," said Keita, setting the box on the table. "No, no, no," groaned Beamish. "That's not food. Open it up, man." Keita lifted the box to eye level, squinted at it suspiciously for a moment, then sniffed it. "You're sure?" "Yes, yes," shouted a dozen impatient voices. "Open it! Open it up!" Keita shrugged and opened the box. 12 tiny, identical transistors lay gleaming on a bed of black velvet. "Well?" said Beamish eagerly. Answered Keita. "What do you mean, asked Beamish nervously. "I mean it's a silly damn way to pack transistors. But they look like they'll do the job," said Keita, snapping the lid closed. The sighs of relief were heard in the corridor. Keita pushed his chair back from the table and stood up. "I realize that I've put you all to a lot of trouble, and I'd like to offer some kind of payment for your services. But frankly, gentlemen, I don't know how I can—" "Oh, you can, interrupted Beamish excitedly. "What I mean to say is that if you really want to, you can." "How?" "Why, you could provide us with a small amount of information." Beamish looked definitely nervous. "Be more specific, General." Keita was beginning to look grim. "Well, we were thinking, it would be nice if you'd agree to have a friendly chat with some of our people. For instance, an hour or so with our physicists, then maybe a half hour with a few sociologists, and perhaps the same amount of time with the Senators' Committee." Keita closed his eyes and sighed. Okay, boys, but make it quick. Also, let's keep it to 20 minutes for each inquisition. Come on, when do we start? Now?" The scientists were the first, and the easiest. He gave them just enough information to whet their appetites, just enough to plant the suggestion that it took a great deal of tolerance and patience on his part to hold an interview with such backward people. "Gentlemen, I'd love to explain the principle of the neutrino drive, but frankly I don't know where to begin. You just don't have the mathematics for it." He didn't bother to add that neither, did he? "Yes, of course. I'm sure I understand what you're getting at. My God, why shouldn't I? Even a child can understand those equations." "You call that a representation of the mass energy constant? No offense, old man, but I'm afraid you're going to have to start all over again. Invention doesn't take the place of research, you know." The social scientists were next. "As I explained a moment ago, we are heterosexual and live an organized community life, but not in any cultural context that could be explained by the term. You might say that our cultural continuum, although the term for us is quite meaningless, is a function of an intricately structured social organism with institutional coordinates that are largely internalized. Do you follow me, gentlemen?" They certainly did not. But the Senators' Committee, as usual, got the information it wanted. Senator Humper. "Now, young man, you claim that your base is on one of 3 inhabited planets of Aldebaran. You also claim that in the known universe there are 1,200 or more inhabited worlds, all welded together in a kind of super-united nations. Did you or did you not state as much?" Keita. "Uh-huh." Humper. "Well, now it appears that we're getting someplace. Tell us, how does each planet manage to qualify for membership in this organization?" Keita. "Why, they have to pass the test, of course." Humper. "Test? What test?" Keita. "The Bruxelles-Hooker-Gall test. We administer it to anybody who seems to be qualified." Humper. Tell us, young man, just exactly what sort of test is this? An intelligence test?" Keita. "Yes, you might call it that, although it has a number of sections. Actually, Gall has divided it into 3 parts. Humper. "I see. Well, what kind of parts?" Keita. "Well, let's see. First, there's the fuel test." Humper. Fuel test? Keter. Let me explain. All very simple, really. Let's take the case of a planet that seems to be qualified for Federation membership in every respect but one. They don't have interstellar flight. Now, since membership imposes duties requiring commercial, diplomatic and scientific intercourse between member worlds, the applicant must be able, within a comparatively short time, to engineer its own transportation. Follow me? Humper. Yes, go on. Keter. Well, since the biggest technological stumbling block for most planets in such a situation is the development of the necessary fuel, we'll help them along. In other words, we give them the fuel test. We supply a sample quantity of Z67As, our standard thermonuclear power source. If the applicant, working with the sample, is able to reproduce the fuel in quantity, then that's it. They've passed that portion of the test, and at the same time have developed the means for interstellar flight. Follow me? Humper. Yes, of course. Now how about the second part of the test? Keter. Oh yes, that's the weapons section. Humper. I'm sorry, I'm afraid I didn't hear you. I thought you said weapons. Keter. I did. You see, it's a matter of self-defense. There are a number of primitive worlds that have developed interstellar flight, but have not achieved the cultural and social levels that would qualify them for membership. As a result, they become rather nasty about this exclusion and devote themselves to warring against any Federation ship that comes within range. You'd call them pirates, I think. Anyway, the Federation patrol keeps them pretty well in hand, but occasionally the Blues, that's our nickname for them since all other ships are blue, do manage to waylay a ship or raid a Federation planet. So naturally, every ship must carry suitable armament. The standard equipment is an R-37AX computer missile, even more complicated for an applicant to manufacture than the reactor fuel. Therefore, we provide a sample missile along with our blessings. The rest is up to the applicant. Humper. And the last part of the test? Keter. Oh, that's genetic. We require a specimen, a woman from the applicant's world. She's taken to a Federation laboratory, evaluated genetically, physiologically, psychologically. Our people are able to extrapolate the future racial and to some degree cultural development of the entire planet after about 2 weeks' works. Needless to say, the entire process of testing is painless. The subject is made as comfortable as possible, and after the test period, the specimen is returned as quickly as possible to her home world. Humper. Well now, don't you think, after what you've seen of us, that we might possibly qualify? At least qualify to take the test? I'm sure you will be surprised. Keter. Oh no, you don't. I fulfilled whatever obligation I had by answering your questions. That was the agreement, remember? Information exchange for the transistors. Now, gentlemen, if you'll excuse me. Keter allowed himself to be delivered back to the ship in a staff car. Beamish and several others were on hand to see him off. He shook hands all around, a custom which amused him immensely, since the same act meant something tremendously different in most other parts of the universe. Back in the ship, he walked to his cabin, stripped off his clothes, showered, ate, dressed again. Going into the control room, he checked a number of detectors, found no evidence that any Blues were hunting for him, left the control room and walked back to a supply room. Here he selected a plastic vacuum solenoid from a rack, hefted it in one hand for a moment, then deliberately let it drop to the floor. He picked it up, squinted at it, then walked out to the airlock. General Beamish was delighted. Everyone was delighted. "No trouble at all," said Beamish, who had already made a phone call that had galvanized 2,000 scientists and technicians into action. "We'll have it for you in no time." "I certainly hope so," said Keter. Some of the flippancy had left him, and it was apparent that this new bid for assistance was causing him considerable embarrassment, for a short time anyway. "Yes, sir," said Beamish, grinning. "Glad to be of help. In fact, we're flattered that you'd let us, primitive as we are, help at all. We primitives don't often have an opportunity to do this sort of thing, you know. Beamish believed in rubbing while the rubbing was good. The solenoids, 40 in all, were delivered the following morning. They were packaged in a small black box lined with velvet. This time Keita made no comment about the packaging. Instead, he rose from his chair in the conference room, tucked the box under an arm, and addressed the group. "Gentlemen, I'd like you to know just how much I appreciate this favour. Evidently, I misjudged your level of technology, and for this I apologize. I don't know how I can repay you for this latest favour, but if you'd like, I'll be glad to formally submit your planet's application for Federation membership as soon as I return to Aldebaran." "When will that be?" asked Senator Humper unceremoniously. "Oh, about 10 of your years, at a guess." 10 years? My God, man, can't you do something sooner?" "Well, I suppose. I could administer the first 2 parts of the test myself. Why, yes, I suppose I could drop off your samples and your specimen at the Federation branch laboratory in Andromeda." "Wonderful," shouted Beamish. "When do we begin?" He was genuinely awed when 3 weeks later they began loading enormous quantities of Z-67As into his ship. He did not check the stuff, but had no doubts that it was, atom for atom, identical to the sample of fuel he had given them. Their R-37AX computer missiles arrived the same afternoon. There were 400 of them. He selected one at random and had it taken into the ship's laboratory. Here he ran a number of routine tests. The missile was not identical to the sample. They had made a number of improvements in the circuitry. Keita reflected grimly that a race such as this would probably be able to deduce a launching and firing system for the thing, would probably have the planet ringed with launching stations within weeks. If the Blues had picked up a trace of him, he reflected, they would be atomized before they got within 500,000 miles of the planet. The specimen for genetics, which he had almost forgotten about, arrived an hour before he was scheduled to depart. He was stunned again. She was undoubtedly the most attractive woman Keita had ever set eyes on. "Oh, I'm so excited," said the young lady, in a voice slightly suggestive of the Virgin on the way to the sacrifice. "I'm excited too," said Keita honestly. In the control room, Keita set a course for Arcturus. He then tripped a lever which fed a month's supply of the Earthman's fuel into the ship's almost empty reaction chambers. Another lever fed 50 computer missiles into 50 completely empty launching racks. He checked the detectors, but found no trace of the blue ships of the Federation patrol. Keita allowed himself the luxury of a sigh. It was a long way to Arcturus, a long, lonely way. Even for a hardened pirate, he reflected sadly. Then he remembered that was why he had asked for the girl. The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. The Satellite Keeper's Daughter, for the next story, by Mark Reinsberg. Originally published in Fantastic Universe, December 1956. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Sex and space don't mix, and Matterpenny's Galactic Guidebook can't be trusted. If you doubt either proposition, ask Bill Brack. It's hard to tell what he thought about women, but all space truckers used to look upon Matterpenny's little red book as a sort of interstellar Bible. "Looking for a planet to stop over at," they'd say. "Place to get good meals, decent room for the night. You can't go wrong with Matterpenny." Brack did. You see, the Galactic Guidebook lists Corby as one of the 5 small fuel stations sharing the outermost orbit of the Dryodian planetary system. The latest edition still gives Hotel Eros 2 asterisks. Now, 2 asterisks is supposed to mean plain but fairly comfortable. Sure, says Brack, the hotel may lack an up-to-date dream-awake or a time conditioner, but at least you expect your room to have a vibrobath and controllable gravity. None of this at the Hotel Eros. Brack shakes his head complainingly. You sleep in a primitive 7-8G bed. You wash yourself in old-fashioned magnetic water. An oxygen service costs 10% extra. Some people ask, then why in the world did you stay there? Had to, Bill answers. I was hoarding out of Dryad 7 with a cargo of deluplasm. Damned valuable stuff, consigned to Hesdin too. Well, I'd figured the time a little wrong, and it left me with 12 hours to kill before our convoy jumped off. And you know how it is. I was facing 3 weeks of interstellar rations, and I had a sudden yen for non-synthetic food. So I looked in the guidebook, and there was Corby. Brack was disappointed from the start. When he sat at a table of the hotel restaurant and studied the menu, he saw it was all synthetics. Blast it, he barked into the table phone. Haven't you anything else? I understand how you feel, mister. It was a live, human, female voice that answered, not the usual robot. Hold on, I'll come out and see if I can help you. Through the kitchen door emerged a young girl, short and white-skinned, but very well-proportioned. Outbound? She queried. Her pretty face was clouded by an unhappy expression. Yes, and I wanted something with a little taste to it, a little substance. Such as what? Said the girl, tossing her long blonde hair. Brack looked at the girl carnivorously. A steak. She smiled sympathetically. We haven't anything of that sort. Sorry. She stared at him with light blue eyes the colour of moonstones. How do you happen to land at this miserable place? Fuel? I'm early for my convoy. Brack stared at the girl's face, and he could see it was the mask of some hidden, tragic emotion. You weren't thinking of staying at the Hotel Eros? She inquired in a voice edged with repugnance. Well, I do have about 12 hours. The girl was emphatic. Take my advice, mister. Spend them in your ship. A man's voice crackled over the table phone. Esther! She looked startled. Yes, she said, leaning over the table to speak into the phone. Beautiful, thought Brack. She must have some earth blood in her veins. The man's voice was angry, strident. Don't gab with the customers. Esther stood up, a blush of embarrassment on her milky white cheeks. Your order, please, she said to Brack stiffly. The trucker put his big brown-coloured hand over the phone. Who's that character? He asked with distaste. The boss? The girl nodded unhappily. I didn't realize he was listening. Sounds like a tyrant. Brack uncovered the phone. What's the closest thing you have to beefsteak? Why don't you try some of a roasted pradolan? It's quite good, she added for the boss's benefit. Specialty of the house. There's just one thing I want to know, said Brack. Is it synthetic? The girl smiled sadly. I'd do anything for some real food myself. I haven't left Corby in 7 years. What makes you stick around a place like this? Married? No, my father owns the Eros. You're free, brown, and 21, said Brack somewhat inaccurately. He can't make you stay if you want to leave. Esther waved warningly at the table phone, and Brack again covered it with his hand. Maybe he can't legally, but there's only one passenger ship between here and the planets every year, and they refused me a ticket twice now. Sounds pretty rotten to me, said the trucker. Well, what if you got married to some guy? Then he couldn't... A heavy-set white man, bald and bullet-headed, strode out of the kitchen and seized the girl roughly by the arm. Now I told you not to gab with the customers, and I meant it, he snarled. You get back there in the kitchen where you belong. She tried to wrench free of his grip. Take your hands off me. Slap. He battered her across the cheek with his open hand, and she staggered from the blow. "No back talk, young lady. Now git!" The trucker half rose from his seat, his fists clenched, but it was over too quickly for him to intervene. And after all, he reflected later while eating her Pradolan roast, the man was her father. With some misgivings, Brack checked into the hotel. It was a tiny installation, perhaps 9 or 10 rooms. His own cubicle was a drab affair, with neither entertainment screen nor sleep-inducer. He had just tested the 7-8G bed with disgust when there was a buzz at the door. It was Esther, holding some linens. "They have you doing everything round here," Brack said, with empathy. "What are these?" "Towels. You use them after you wash." "Boy, this sure is ancient." Esther's eyes betrayed deep torment. "I know. I would do anything to get away from this place." She put the towels in a rack. The trucker was lying on the bed, contemplating the girl's deft, graceful movements. "Listen," he said, "why wait for a passenger ship? Why not arrange secretly with one of the cargo ships that stop here? I know if I was inbound—" "Don't even say it," she expostulated. "It's very kind of you, but certainly you've heard of the Pledge Act. My father could prosecute any cargo ship, no matter where it landed in the planets. You know, unlicensed transport of people." She paused to look at herself in a mirror above the washstand. Brack's eyes were on her bare, marble-white shoulders, her finely sculptured bosom. She sighed. "No, my only chance is to get away from the Dryodian system altogether. If I go to another star, where the Pledge Act wasn't even heard of—" She brushed back her long blonde hair with an unconscious gesture, like a maiden getting out of a gravity pool. Brack said thoughtfully, "Esther, if you're really determined to get away from here, maybe I can help you. I'm taking a cargo to Hesdin. Your old man couldn't reach you there, or prove anything against me either." The girl's moonstone eyes flared up in hope, but she hesitated. "I don't have very much money. I couldn't make it worth your while financially." "That part is unimportant. The thing for you to consider is the situation on Hesdin too. It's a new colony. Life there is pretty primitive." Esther waved at the room. "Any more so than here?" Brack grinned. "Not much more. But then also, you've got to remember that it's a 3-week trip. Pretty monotonous. Just the two of us." She looked him in the eyes with understanding. "I try not to get in the way." They met in the middle of the night at Brack's ship. Working slowly, soundlessly, they opened a cargo case and removed enough unit boxes to make room for the girl. Esther settled down in the container. "I'm afraid that isn't too comfortable," Brack apologized. "But you'll only have to put up with it 4 hours. I take off at 7. "That's all right, Bill. Just so there's no delay. My father expects me to open the dining room at 7. "We'll be 10 million miles away before he misses you," said Brack. He put the top on loosely, faking the straps across the cover so the girl could breathe. In his room again, Brack lay with arms folded under his head, thinking honeyed thoughts. He would have Esther's pleasant company. His cargo was a valuable one. 2/3 of the receipt on Hesdin 2 would represent sheer profit. Perhaps it would be enough to establish him in some kind of a local freight business. Esther could make a man a wonderful partner. Lovely, delectable girl. He reminded himself that they were not safely away from Corby yet, and he passed the remaining hours in the Hotel Eros sleeplessly anxious. Brack delayed going to his ship until the last minute before take-off time. Then, as he half feared, he saw a customs officer standing beside the airlock. The trucker tried taking the offensive. "Gosh, I'll be late for my convoy if I don't leave right away." "Sorry, sir, but I'll have to inspect your ship." He was a burly, tough-looking character in pale green uniform, blocking the doorway with a flat-footed wrestling stance. Brack sensed that a contest of fists might not end in his favour. He unlocked the entrance and waved the official in with reluctance. "Take a look, but I've already gone through customs on Dryod 7. I can show you my clearance." "This isn't customs exactly," said the man. "We're searching for a person." "A person?" The old man sure kept a close watch on his daughter. "I'm the only person aboard this ship." The customs official remained polite. "Yes, I understand that, sir, but Mr. Eros's daughter is missing. He thinks she may have stowed away on your ship." "Impossible! I had the ship locked." They stepped into the pilot's cabin, a tetrahexahedron-shaped room crowded with multiple monitor screens of an astrogation computer. Brack threw the ignition switch to start the build-up and the ship's nuclear engine. "What is your cargo?" the customs man demanded. 15 cases of deluplasm," said Brack with unfeigned anxiety. The official debated with himself. "I believe it would be best if I opened the cases." Brack looked at his watch with desperation. "But we don't have time. That would take at least a half hour. I'd miss the other ships. And you know what that would mean. I couldn't navigate interstellar space alone, not at 100 times the speed of light. I'd be stuck here in the Dryodian system until the next fleet left. That might be months." He grabbed the official's arm. "Please, fellow, give me a break." The customs man considered. "Well, since the ship was locked, it does seem unlikely that the girl has hidden herself here. I certainly wouldn't want you to lose your convoy." Brack smiled in relief and started the rocket engine secondaries. "Thanks a million. But just to protect me in case the girl has run off somewhere, I want you to sign this form." Brack felt a twinge of suspicion, but more than a twinge of haste. "Sure, what kind of form is this?" "It simply says that I inspected each case in your presence and found the contents identical with your bill of lading. This girl has made several attempts to leave Corby in the past. This is my protection in case she's finally succeeded." The customs officer made the slightest perceptible wink. Brack signed. He took off immediately. He was already 10 minutes late. He had to blast at top speed for the next hour, continually correcting his navigation. There was no time to go back and let Esther out of the cargo room. He had to remain at the controls, feeding data into the computer, modifying course as solutions flashed on the screen. Finally, Brack sighted the convoy and maneuvered into pattern just as the fleet was dematerializing into supraspace. He set his ship on pantograph automatic with a lead navigator, then hastened to the cargo hold. Esther was not there. Neither were 10 of the 15 cases of deluplasm. 2/3 of his cargo had been hijacked. It was of course pointless for Brack to turn around and raise hell on Corby. With the waiver he'd signed for the customs officer, he'd only look ridiculous. All he could do was continue to Hesdin 2 with his 1/3 cargo. At least he'd break even on the trip. Esther and her co-workers had been that considerate. No, sex and space don't mix. And it's high time that Mr. Matterpenny deleted the Hotel Eros from his little red guidebook. The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story. A Zloor for Your Trouble by Mack Reynolds. Originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, January 1954. Narrated by Tom Trussel. I was sitting on the cot in the little room at the rear of my hand garage where I keep my equipment and most of my trophies, and cleaning my .257 Roberts when the knock came at the door. It was a sharp, decisive knock. Then the door opened, and I saw Wesley Marks for the first time. It didn't excite me. He said, "Mr. Napoleon Prescott?" I began to say, "Everybody calls me Nap," but then I didn't. There was something about this guy that didn't click with me. Say what you will against snap judgments, I still take my love at first sight, and enmity often the same way. For one thing, he gave me the impression of looking for trouble. He was about 6'2", and he had what he obviously thought was an aristocratic face. His nose was the type that used to be called Roman, and looked like it'd be honey to punch. He was dressed like a million, which didn't particularly impress me either. I'm on the rugged side myself, red-headed and homely to boot. He took in the rifle I was cleaning, and his eyebrows went up questioningly. "Collector?" he asked. Somehow or other he managed to put over the impression that he thought I didn't have the intellect to have a hobby. "Not exactly," I told him. "This is a tool, not a collector's item." There was almost a laugh in his voice now. "You mean you use that relic in your work?" I put the gun down, told myself to take it easy, then said, "They've made a lot of developments in weapons since this rifle was popular, but it still has advantages on certain types of jobs. For instance, if I was after a Kodiak bear up in the Alaska National Park," he snorted, "I'd take a bazooka rifle and be sure who came out on top." "Sure you would," I told him. "And there wouldn't be enough bear left to feed your dogs. I usually work for a zoo or a museum. They either want the animal alive or in good mounting condition. I admit that they've got guns now that one man can carry that sink one of the old-time battleships. Okay, but in my line I seldom need one." He didn't like my tone of voice, but he dropped the point and began looking around for a place to sit. I hadn't asked him to sit down, and I didn't now. I said, "Was there something I could do for you?" "I wanted to hire you for a rather lengthy period," he told me. "I'm all booked up for the next 6 months. This is something rather special." It always is when somebody wants you to cancel a job with a regular client. He didn't like me any better than I liked him. That was obvious. He said, "This comes under the heading of work for the government." I told him, "There are other professional hunters, some of them nearly as good as I am." The last was sarcastic. "Possibly better," he said, "but none of them are your size." I could feel my face approaching the colour of my hair at that one. "Keep my size out of it," I snapped. I indicated with a thumb a little statuette on my desk. "The guy my mother named me after was pint-sized too. He got along all right." He looked over at Bonaparte. He said, "Napoleon was a big name once, but he's only a bust now." "Listen," I told him, "you're asking for a bust yourself. Why don't you run along? I'm busy." He ignored me, found a chair that had nothing but a few magazines on it, tossed them to the floor, and sat down. "Your name was brought up because you're the smallest professional hunter on Earth. It'd save a few thousand credits in getting you to Mars and back." That stopped me. "What in Kurt are you talking about?" I growled. "The government wants a specimen, at least one, of a Zloor." "A what?" "A Zloor," he repeated. "A small Martian animal." I scowled at him. "And just why does the government want a Zloor?" "That's a secret." "Okay, I'll tell you another secret. Somebody else can catch the government a Zloor. I've never been off Earth, and I haven't any particular hankering to go now." I picked up the .257 Roberts again and reached for my oil can. He got to his feet, something just this side of a sneer on his face, and said, "I doubt if you could have got one anyway." I said easily, "If anyone else could catch it, I could." He reached for the doorknob. "I'd lay 1,000 credits against that," he said. He began to leave. "Wait a minute, buddy," I snapped. "Are you just sounding off, or have you got 1,000 credits you don't care what happens to?" He turned and faced me. "I am willing to wager 1,000 credits that you can't capture a Zloor." How big are they? About the size of a rabbit. I glowered at him. They very fast, or very poisonous, or what? He shrugged. They can't run quite as fast as a common Terran hare, and I understand they're quite gentle. Then why haven't they been captured? Among other things, Napoleon, he rolled my name over his tongue as though he got a big laugh from it. There have been only a few hundred persons in all that have gone to Mars. Few of them, to my knowledge, have been interested in the life forms there. The expense of freight in space is much too high for Terran zoos to transport Martian life forms, particularly alive, considering the cost of duplicating in the spacecraft the living conditions necessary to— "All right," I snapped. "Just a minute." I picked up the visor phone and dialed rapidly. In seconds, Jerry Mason's friendly pan lit up the screen. "Listen, Jerry," I said. "Have you ever heard of a Martian Zloor?" His eyebrows went up. "Sure. What? Are they particularly fast?" "No, of course not, but— "Are they dangerous?" He grinned, but he was still puzzled. "I'd say they were about the least dangerous animal I ever heard of, but Nap— Just one more question, Jerry. I'm in a hurry. Do you think I could catch one?" "I can't think of anything you could catch easier." He started to give one of his short bursts of laughter. "But—" "Thanks, Jerry," I told him. "See you later." I snapped off the set and turned back to Wesley Marks. "All right. Answer just one question, and I'll take up that bet of yours. What's secret about this?" "If I tell you, you'll take on the job?" "The job and the 1,000-credit bet," I grated. "Very well. It is suspected that the Zloor is an alien life form." I stared at him. "Are you around the corner?" I demanded. "Of course it's an alien life form. Didn't you just say it's a Martian animal?" But some authorities think it is alien to this solar system. At least they suspect so. That's why the government wants a specimen to dissect and thoroughly investigate. They haven't the facilities on Mars, of course, so it will be necessary to bring one back here." I still stared at him. "Alien to the solar system? Your roof must be leaking. How would it get here?" A sudden suspicion hit me. "You mean it's intelligent? I thought there wasn't any intelligent life forms on Mars." He shook his head. "It's a stupid, herbivorous animal." He shot a glance down at his watch. "The shuttle for the space station leaves in 3 hours. Can you make it?" I glared at him. "You give me plenty of time, don't you? I'll make it all right. But first I want this bet down in writing." "Of course," he said smoothly. I had to hustle plenty. The Zloor wasn't any bigger than a rabbit, and I knew that life forms on Mars were in general small, so I took nothing larger than my little carbine-sized .22 Hornet, another gun that Wesley Marks probably would have sneered at, but which I wouldn't have traded for all the automatics you could shake a stick at. I didn't take much else. No clothes except the shorts I wore when I climbed into the shuttle rocket for the space station. When Mark said freight rates in space were high, he wasn't just whistling terror forever. I could buy clothes and any other equipment I needed a good deal cheaper on Mars than the cost of transporting them there would come to. For one thing, when anybody left the colony planet to come back to Terra, they invariably left behind everything in the way of clothing and personal equipment. For another, a certain amount of these things were being manufactured on Mars from native raw materials in an attempt to escape the murderous space rates. After the 4G's acceleration had cut off, and we were in free fall, I took the opportunity to read the contract I'd hurriedly signed with Wesley Marks. On thorough reading, the contract didn't seem too bad. All my expenses to and from Mars were paid by Marks. I also got 5 credits a month in the way of salary. No fortune, but average pay for a Terran worker. If I caught a Zloor and brought it back alive, I got 500 credit bonus. If I brought 2 back alive, a 700 credit bonus. If I brought a dead one back, I got a 300 bonus. Wesley Marks didn't seem to be interested in getting more than one dead one, since there wasn't any provision for a larger number. He'd given me to understand that this job was for the government, but from the way the contract read, I was working for the Marks Enterprises. That irritated me for a minute or so, but I finally shrugged it off. He probably had a government contract to secure one of the things. I still couldn't figure out what his angle was, but I knew there must be one. Too much money was involved to make this a routine assignment such as I usually work on for the zoos. Evidently, Marks ran some sort of an expediting outfit which took on off-trail contracts. At this point, I might do a little in the way of describing my trip to the space station which circles Terra and is used as a takeoff point to Luna and the planets. I might go on and tell of my journey from there to the space station in orbit about Mars, and then, further still, of my shuttling down to Fort Mars and my first impressions of landing there, of the 1/6 gravity, the thin air, the plastic dome which covers the whole little city. But the trouble is that 100 people a lot quicker with a dictotyper than I am have already done the job. I'll just leave that part of it and take up with my first contact with my fellow Terrans on Mars. One of the old gags is to the effect that when Greek meets Greek, they start a restaurant. Okay, maybe, but I do know this, that when man in general starts up a new colony, one of the first buildings he puts up is a bar. At any rate, as soon as I was settled at the Builtless Hotel, the name, of course, is a gag, but the place lived up to it, I made my way to Sam's. Now, there's something that invariably happens to people who get around. It's happened to you, if you're one of us. Maybe you're walking through the Congo Game Preserve, figuring there isn't another man, white or otherwise, within 100 kilometers. Suddenly you run into another party, and somebody yells, "Hello, Nap! What in Kurt are you doing here?" The last time you saw him was in San Francisco. Or maybe you're doing some solitary drinking in some obscure bar in Guatemala. The guy next to you looks over and says, "Say, aren't you Snap Prescott, the brother of—" And of course, you are. Well, that was it. I hadn't any more got up to the bar and told Sam, "Let me have some of this Martian woji I've been hearing so much about," when I heard somebody yelp, "It's Nap! I'll be a grinning Macron if it isn't Nap!" I turned around, and there was Mike Holliday, as big as life, and twice as drunk. He waddled his bulk over to me. Mike always waddles when he's soused, from the table where he'd been sitting. "By the holy jumping Vodo," he crowed, "I'll bet my left arm you came to get a Zloor." I'd been grinning and holding out my hand to clasp his, but that stiffened me. He saw it and began to laugh uproariously. "Another joiner of the club," he yelped. "Come on over and meet your fellow members. You got one of them Wesley contracts too?" That did it. I went over and met the boys. Mike Holliday wasn't the only acquaintance of mine in Fort Mars. In fact, it was like a convention of the outstanding professional hunters of Earth. They all shouted their greetings, some of them laughing so hard tears rolled down their cheeks. Evidently, they got a big kick every time a newcomer was added to their ranks. I shook hands with some, but most were too hilarious to go through the ceremony. Blackie Conover yelled, "I'll bet anybody 2-1 he brought a 22 Hornet to shoot himself as law. 2-1. "Do we look like suckers?" Mike yelled back at him. I sank into a chair and took it for a while. "I can wait," I growled at them. "Sooner or later somebody'll get around to telling me what goes on." "He can wait," he says. Doughbelly fairly yelped in delight. "Brother, he ain't just a whistling terror forever. He can wait. Bring on the woji. Start the initiation." I woke up in the morning in Mike Holliday's apartment. I groaned and told myself that I was sworn off of woji for all time. I didn't know then that Terracide liquor sold for 10 credits a bottle. Mike was grinning down at me. "You'll get used to woji," he said. "I should live so long," I moaned. Then I sat up suddenly in the bed. "You guys wouldn't tell me anything last night," I said. He was still grinning. "That's part of the initiation into the Zloor Club. What do you want to know, Nap?" I swung my feet over the side of the bed and came to a sitting position. I groaned and shook my head in an attempt to clear it. "What are half the professional hunters I know doing on Mars?" He spun a chair around so that the back faced me and straddled it, his arms resting on the top rung. "Same thing you are, Nap, being suckers for that Macron Wesley Marks." I started to say something there, but he interrupted me with a wave of a hand. "This is what it boils down to. Marks has a contract with some branch of the government to bring back one or more Zloors, and don't ask me why he doesn't go out and catch one himself. He's tried." "He has, eh?" "Yes, he has. Had a whole crew up here. What makes it nice for him is that he's on a cost-plus basis. If he never succeeds, it'll still be money in his pocket. If he does, he gets a whopping big bonus. Every time he sends another man up here to take a crack at getting his Zloor, he makes money. No doubt the way he told you the story, you'd think you were the only one trying." I snorted. He told me I'd been picked because I was the smallest pro-hunter in the game. Mike Holliday grinned. "He picked me because I was so big. I could stand the rigours of life of Mars," he said. "Well, if it's a racket, why doesn't everybody go home on the next ship?" "Probably for the same reason you won't. That sharper made me so sore I bet him 500 credits I could catch a Zloor." "I bet him 1,000, I groaned. Mike whistled. "Where'd you ever get 1,000 credits, Nap?" "I broke into my piggy bank," I growled. "It's every cent I had in the world." "Well, we're all in the same boat. He made bets with all the boys. If we go back, we lose. As long as we stay here, we make 5 credits a month, plus expenses. And, besides, all of us are just conceited enough to think we can figure out eventually how to get one of the things home." "Now you're getting to the point," I told him. "What's so hard about catching a Zloor?" He began to grin again. "Nothing," he said, "and that's all I'll tell you now. Go out and find the gruesome details yourself." I went over to the wash basin and filled the bowl and dipped my head into the water. I didn't say anything else to him until I'd dried myself and climbed into my clothes. "All right," I said then. "Where do I go to see about getting equipment and men for an expedition to the Zloor country?" He laughed. "All you need in the way of equipment is your feet. That is, besides a plastic oxygen mask when you leave the dome." He pointed out the window. "Just head for the nearest rocky area. There's lots of it. You won't have any trouble finding a Zloor. In fact, they're numerous. No natural enemies." I scowled at him. "What keeps them down, then?" "Insufficient forage, I guess. You'll see." I picked up my .22 Hornet rifle and started for the door. "No time like the present to—" I began to say. Mike was still grinning in the irritating manner he'd been displaying ever since the night before. "You won't need that gun," he told me. "I'll just take it along anyway," I snapped. After leaving the dome, through one of the airlocks, I headed out into the surface of Mars, weighted down with my leaded boots, standard equipment for cutting down some of the effect of the 1/6 gravity of the planet. Over to the westward, possibly 3 miles away, seemed to be a barren, rocky area. I knew that Mike Holliday wouldn't have deliberately lied to me. That was where Zloors were to be found. I made my way in that direction. "About the size of a rabbit," I muttered, "and half the hunters on Earth can't bring one back." I made the rocky area and found myself a suitable prominence from which to look around. In less than 15 minutes, I'd spotted one of the things. They were about the size of a rabbit, all right, and what was more, they looked considerably like one of the Earth-type rodents. Long ears, nub of a tail. I watched it for some time through the small glass I'd borrowed from Mike. It was evidently eating the bark, and possibly the wood as well, of a stunted, rugged-looking Martian tree which seemed to be growing out of almost solid rock. The boys had said that there were a lot of Zloors around, so I didn't have to worry about conversion. I took up the rifle, aimed carefully through the scope, and squeezed the trigger. I was interested, eventually, in getting a live Zloor, but it wouldn't hurt to have a closer look at one of the things to help me in planning my campaign. The gun snapped, and I could see the tiny bullet spank into the little animal's side. I'd got him. But something didn't look right. I took up the telescope again and peered through it. The Zloor was still eating. That stopped me. I could have sworn that I'd hit it right amidships. I aimed even more carefully this time for its head and squeezed gently. That shot too hit dead center. But the Zloor didn't bother to stop its feeding. I sat there a long time staring at it. Finally I snorted inwardly. Obviously this was what had been stopping the others. This animal had some very effective natural body armor. Well, there is more than one way of skinning a Zloor, as well as a cat. I picked up the rifle and headed down toward the tree and the animal that was devouring it, figuring to get as close as possible with the idea of getting a really good look at the bulletproof beastie. I wished now that I'd brought my .257 Roberts instead of the .22 Hornet. At first, I was careful in my approach, slipping from cover to cover, but as I got closer, it became evident that the Zloor wasn't particularly timid, and that as far as it was concerned, I could come as near as I wanted. I stood off about 5 feet and watched it for a long time. Once it looked up and over at me, but then went back to the tree, in which it was making a respectable hole. I tried once again with the rifle, aiming carefully right behind its ear. The gun snapped, and the bullet thudded, but the Zloor ignored it. "Holy Wodo!" I snorted. "He's really bulletproof." In fact, he was more than just bulletproof. The shock of the impact of the high-powered .22 hadn't even bothered him. It wasn't just a matter of the bullet's inability to penetrate the hide. Well, I told myself, let's see just how close I can come before it runs off. I walked up to him cautiously. He didn't move. In my surprise, I even prodded him gently with my shoe. He still didn't move. He looked up at me again, his eyes a wistful yellowish colour, then went back to his meal. I shook my head, wondering if I was still suffering from the effects of the Woji binge, or what. This was just too easy. Maybe it was a sick one or something. I reached down and grasped it by the ears and started to pick it up. Have you ever tried to pick up something and found out it either weighed considerably more or was fastened to the floor? That's what happened to me. With Martian gravity what it is, I figured I'd have a weight of possibly 1 earth-pound of lift. Instead, I nearly broke my back, and the Zloor still didn't budge. I put more pressure to bear, all my strength, and the Zloor complacently went on eating. Hands on hips, I stood above the rabbit-like animal and stared at it. Finally I muttered, more than one way to bring home a Zloor, and taking my gun by the barrel, I swung it viciously down at the gentle-looking little animal, feeling like a heel as I did it. I might have saved my feelings, because 2 seconds later I was gazing wide-eyed at the shattered stock of my rifle, and the Zloor was still eating away at the tree. I tried just one more experiment before I called it a day. I put the rifle barrel under him and tried to pry him off the ground. The Zloor still ignored me, but the steel barrel bent under the pressure. The animal hadn't budged. Without knocking, I walked back into Mike Holliday's room. He was lying stretched out on the bed, his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling. He didn't need to look at me. He said, "Nap, you are now a full-fledged member of the Zloor Club." "What does one of those things weigh?" I snapped. "Hey, redhead," he grunted, "don't take it out on me. I didn't invent them. Far as I know, nobody's ever weighed one, but it's been estimated that they go about 5 tons here on Mars, 6 times that on Earth." "That's insane." "Sure is. That's why the government wants one so badly. Just isn't natural for such an animal to develop in the solar system. Or anywhere else." He got up on one elbow and grinned over at me. "The theory is that it's a life form from some planet belonging to a white dwarf star. Some time ago, a guy named Adams at the Mount Wilson Observatory, back on Earth, estimated that the density of some of the white dwarfs was 2,000 times greater than platinum. I'm not much up on it myself." I scowled down at him. "How did it get here?" He was serious now. "That's the reason the government wants one so badly, Nap. They want to get it to their laboratories and find out everything they can. There's only seems to be one possibility, though." "What's that?" "If it is alien to the solar system and from a white dwarf's planet, it might have been brought here deliberately and left as a guinea pig." I began to say something there, but he held up a hand to stop me. "Possibly an exploring spaceship from the alien planet was looking for colony sites. When it got to our solar system, it left some of these animals with the idea of coming back in a few thousand years or so to see if the Zloors were able to adapt themselves to the conditions existing here." I ran my tongue over suddenly dry lips. "You mean that if the Zloors can live in our solar system, then these more intelligent aliens would figure they could use our sun system for a colonizing project?" He nodded. "Holy Wodo," I said. "No wonder they want some specimens to work on back on Earth." He relaxed again. "Well, at the rate we're going, it'll be a long time before Earth laboratories ever have the opportunity to mess around with our pal the Zloor." I got a chair and sat down facing him and said seriously, "Mike, brief me on what you and the other fellows have tried." "You don't have to ask. That goes with membership in the club," he grinned. "Among other things, we've tried building a steel box around one of them with the idea of putting wheels on it later." "That sounds good." "Uh-huh. The trouble was that when the Zloor felt like moving, he walked right through the side of the steel box, like you or I'd walk through a wall of tissue paper." "How about poisoning one?" I rapped. "You could get a dead one back a lot easier then." "They don't poison," he said, "and from what we can figure, they're practically immortal. We have never found a dead one." "What do you mean they don't poison?" "Just that, Nap. That animal can eat anything organic and thrive on it. Evidently, no poison that nature has ever produced affects it. At least, none of us have been able to dream one up." "How about narcotics? Something to dope it?" He shook his head. "To begin with, some of these Martian plants produce narcotic effects that make the products of our poppy look like food for babes, but the Zloor takes them in its stride. It's really got a cast-iron stomach. We've never been able to locate anything it won't eat and enjoy eating." I didn't say anything for a long time. Then, "A bazooka rifle would kill one." "Sure," he said, "and splatter it all around the scenery at the same time. The laboratories need a good specimen." There was another long silence. Finally I said, "Why in the name of Wodo won't they sink into the ground if they weigh as much as all that?" "They would, only they make a point of walking on rock. That must be one of the things that limits their spreading even more widely. They have to be able to forage on ground that supports very little vegetation." "You could lift one with a derrick," he said. "This is the 5th time I've been through this. Every guy that Wesley Marks send up here asks the same questions. Sure, you could lift it with a derrick if the derrick was big enough. Do you have any idea of what it costs to bring a derrick of that size to Mars? And that's not the only thing either. These Zloors are gentle as lambs, but they hate to be confined against their will. That derrick have to have some awfully strong equipment to keep the Zloor from breaking loose and ambling off. There's other angles there too. Suppose your derrick did lift him into the shuttle. When you got the shuttle up to the space station, how do you move the Zloor from the shuttle to the station, and then from the station to the rocket for Terra?" He got up from the bed and went over to a little table to return with a bottle and a couple of glasses. He poured 2 drinks and handed me one. "Here," he said, "you look like you could use a quick one. Have a hair of a dog that's going to bite Kurt out of you before you ever leave Mars." I grated. I could stand the rest of it, but what burns me up is that Macron, Wesley Marks. Here he is getting rich on the project. Besides what he makes from the government, he's bet every one of us so much that we'll all be out our life savings when we go back. "Brother Knapp, you have said it," Mike Holliday said feelingly. He tilted the glass to his lips and drank deeply. I was right behind him. It was more than 2 years later when I walked into the office of Wesley Marks. I noted with pleasure that he still looked as aristocratic as ever. "Ah," he said, "Mr. Napoleon Prescott. As I recall, the last time we met you objected to my calling your namesake a bust. Don't tell me that we have an additional bust in—" I loved it. I loved every word of it, and he must have seen that I did. "What are you grinning about?" he barked. It was the first time I had seen his poise disturbed. "Frankie," I told him, "is at the spaceport right now. Johnny will be down on the next shuttle. As you can imagine, the shuttle was pretty well strained to capacity to bring even one at a time. It was no trouble in space, of course, since they were weightless in free fall, but entering the gravitational—" He put his hands on the top of the desk and half came to his feet. His eyes were wide. "Who are Frankie and Johnny?" I feigned surprise. "Frankie and Johnny are sweethearts. A couple of Zloors, in this case. Remember? You sent me for them. I thought a male and a female would be best." He slumped back in his chair. "You aren't lying?" I didn't say anything. "How did you do it?" "With peach pits," I said. "Peach pits?" "Peach pits. Peach pits. They're like apricot pits too, and sometimes prune seeds." "What in the world are you talking about, Prescott? Have you lost your mind?" I opened the humidor on his desk, took out a cigar, smelled it, bit off the end, lit it, and took a deep puff before answering him. I settled down into a comfortable chair and pointed the lighted end of the cigar in his direction. "Between one or the other of us, we had tried everything. Everything. I realized finally that it would have to be an entirely different approach." I took another satisfying drag on the cigar, then went on. "I tried lettuce, cabbage, corn, string beans, everything in fact that the hydroponic tanks on Mars could supply in the way of Earth-type food. None of it worked." "What in hell are you talking about?" Marks blurted. I ignored him. Finally it came to me. Lettuce and the other vegetables I offered would be too light for them. I tried walnut hulls, and then peach pits, and that worked like a charm. "You must be insane." "You don't seem to understand, Marks," I told him. "There was no other way of getting a Zloor on board an Earthbound rocket, so I made pets of a couple of them. They love peach pits. Regular delicacy from them," I added reflectively. "You'd be surprised how well trained I've got Frankie and Johnny. I'd hate to give them up." I tapped the ash of the cigar off on his heavy carpet and said, "However, business is business. Let's see, by our contract, you owe me 5 credits for each month I've been gone, plus a 700 credit bonus for bringing back 2 live Zloors, and then there's that 1,000 credit wager we made." He snapped on his inter-office communicator and growled instructions to his secretary to find whether or not I had brought back 2 live Zloors in the Mars rocket. We sat there silently while she checked. I puffed on the cigar with appreciation and dropped the ashes, pointedly, on the floor. He was irritated, but wouldn't give me the satisfaction of complaining. I knew I was being childish, but I loved it. The inter-office communicator buzzed, and he listened to his secretary's report, then reached down into his desk for a checkbook. He said while he was writing it, "I'm sure you'll be pleased to know, Prescott, that in spite of this sum I'm giving you, I'll still make a considerable profit on this deal." I took the check and examined it carefully. I told him, "but I wouldn't be very surprised if a good deal of that profit is going to be melting away." "Eh? What do you mean?" he snapped. I told him, "The other boys up on Mars are still well equipped with peach pits. They're all making pets too. The next few rockets from Mars are going to be loaded with Zloors, Wesley, old man. You're going to have a flock of bets to pay off. And besides that, I'm wondering if the government is going to want that many Zloors. As I understand it, 2 is all they're contracted for with you. Of course, you'll have to pay the boys for them." He didn't say anything as I left, fanning the cheque to dry it, but he looked as though he'd met his Waterloo.
The End. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story. The Delegate from Venus by Henry Slesar, originally published in Amazing Science Fiction Stories, October 1958. Narrated by Tom Trussel. "Let me put it this way," Connors said paternally. "We expect a certain amount of decorum from our Washington news correspondents, and that's all I'm asking for." Jerry Bridges, sitting in the chair opposite his employer's desk, chewed on his knuckles and said nothing. One part of his mind wanted him to play it cagey, to behave the way the newspaper wanted him to behave, to protect the cozy Washington assignment he had waited 4 years to get. But another part of him, a rebel part, wanted him to stay on the trail of the story he felt sure was about to break. "I didn't mean to make trouble, Mr. Connors," he said casually. "It just seemed strange, all these exchanges of couriers in the past 2 days. I couldn't help thinking something was up." "Even if that's true, we'll hear about it through the usual channels," Connors frowned. "But getting a senator's secretary drunk to obtain information, well, that's not only indiscreet, Bridges, it's downright dirty." Jerry grinned. "I didn't take that kind of advantage, Mr. Connors. Not that she wasn't a toothsome little dish. Just thank your lucky stars it didn't go any further. And from now on," he waggled a finger at him, "watch your step." Jerry got up and ambled to the door, but he turned before leaving and said, "By the way, what do you think is going on?" "I haven't the faintest idea." "Don't kid me, Mr. Connors. Think it's war?" "That'll be all, Bridges." The reporter closed the door behind him, and then strolled out of the building into the sunlight. He met Ruskin, the fat little AP correspondent, in front of the Pan-American building on Constitution Avenue. Ruskin was holding the newspaper that contained the gossip column item which had started the whole affair, and he seemed more interested in the romantic rather than political implications. As he walked beside him, he said, "So what really happened, pal? That Greta babe really let down her hair?" "Where's your decorum?" Jerry growled. Ruskin giggled. "Boy, she's quite a dame, all right. I think they ought to get the Secret Service to guard her. She really fills out a size 10, don't she?" "Ruskin," Jerry said, "you have a low mind. For a week this town has been acting like the 39 Steps, and all you can think about is dames. What's the matter with you? Where will you be when the big mushroom cloud comes?" "With Greta, I hope," Ruskin sighed. "What a way to get radioactive." They split off a few blocks later, and Jerry walked until he came to the Red Tape Bar and Grill, a favourite hangout of the local journalists. There were 3 other newsmen at the bar, and they gave him snickering greetings. He took a small table in the rear and ate his meal in sullen silence. It wasn't the newsmen's jibes that bothered him. It was the certainty that something of major importance was happening in the capital. There had been hourly conferences at the White House, flying visits by State Department officials, mysterious conferences involving members of the Science Commission. So far, the byword had been secrecy. They knew that Senator Spocker, chairman of the Congressional Science Committee, had been involved in every meeting, but Senator Spocker was unavailable. His secretary, however, was a little more obliging. Jerry looked up from his coffee and blinked when he saw who was coming through the door of the bar and grill. So did every other patron, but for different reasons. Greta Johnson had that effect upon men. Even the confining effect of a mannishly tailored suit didn't hide her outrageously feminine qualities. She walked straight to his table, and he stood up. "They told me you might be here," she said, breathing hard. "I just wanted to thank you for last night." "Look, Greta." Wham! Her hand, small and delicate, felt like a slab of lead when it slammed into his cheek. She left a bruise 5 fingers wide, and then turned and stalked out. He ran after her, the restaurant proprietor shouting about the unpaid bill. It took a rapid dog trot to reach her side. "Greta, listen," he panted. "You don't understand about last night. It wasn't the way that lousy columnist said." She stopped in her tracks. "I wouldn't have minded so much if you'd gotten me drunk, but to use me, just to get a story." "But I'm a reporter, damn it. It's my job. I'd do it again if I thought you knew anything." She was pouting now. "Well, how do you suppose I feel, knowing you're only interested in me because of the senator? Anyway, I'll probably lose my job, and then you won't have any use for me." "Goodbye, Greta," Jerry said sadly. "What?" "Goodbye. I suppose you won't want to see me any more." "Did I say that?" "It just won't be any use. We'll always have this thing between us." She looked at him for a moment, and then touched his bruised cheek with a tender, motherly gesture. "Your poor face," she murmured, and then sighed. "Oh, well, I guess there's no use fighting it. Maybe if I did tell you what I know, we could act human again." "Greta!" "But if you print one word of it, Jerry Bridges, I'll never speak to you again." "Honey," Jerry said, taking her arm, "you can trust me like a brother." "That's not the idea," Greta said stiffly. In a secluded booth at the rear of a restaurant unfrequented by newsmen, Greta leaned forward and said, "At first they thought it was another Sputnik." "Who did?" "The State Department, silly. They got reports from the observatories about another Sputnik being launched by the Russians. Only the Russians denied it. Then there were joint meetings, and nobody could figure out what the damn thing was." "Wait a minute," Jerry said dizzily. "You mean to tell me there's another of those metal moons up there?" "But it's not a moon. That's the big point. It's a spaceship." "A what?" "A spaceship," Greta said coolly, sipping lemonade. "They have been in contact with it now for about 3 days, and they're thinking of calling a plenary session of the UN just to figure out what to do about it. The only hitch is Russia doesn't want to wait that long and is asking for a hurry-up summit meeting to make a decision." "A decision about what?" "About the Venusians, of course." "Greta," Jerry said mildly, "I think you're still a little woozy from last night." "Don't be silly. The spaceship's from Venus. They've already established that. And the people on it, I guess they're people, want to know if they can land their delegate." "Their what?" "Their delegate. They came here for some kind of conference, I guess. They know about the UN and everything, and they want to take part. They say that with all the satellites being launched, that our affairs are their affairs too. It's kind of confusing, but that's what they say." "You mean these Venusians speak English?" "And Russian, and French, and German, and everything, I guess. They've been having radio talks with practically every country for the past 3 days. Like I say, they want to establish diplomatic relations or something. The senator thinks that if we don't agree, they might do something drastic, like blow us all up. It's kind of scary." She shivered delicately. "You're taking it mighty calm," he said ironically. "Well, how else can I take it? I'm not even supposed to know about it, except that the senator is so careless about—" She put her fingers to her lips. "Oh dear, now you really think I'm terrible." "Terrible? I think you're wonderful." "And you promised not to print it?" "Didn't I say I wouldn't?" "Yes, but you know, you're a liar sometimes, Jerry. I've noticed that about you." The press secretary's secretary, a massive woman with grey hair and impervious to charm, guarded the portals of his office with all the indomitable will of the U.S. Marines. But Jerry Bridges tried. "You don't understand, Lana," he said. "I don't want to see Mr. Howells. I just want you to give him something." "My name's not Lana, and I can't deliver any messages." "But this is something he wants to see." He handed her an envelope stamped urgent. "Do it for me, Hetty, and I'll buy you the flashiest pair of diamond earrings in Washington." "Well," the woman said, thawing slightly, "I could deliver it with his next batch of mail." "When will that be?" "In an hour. He's in a terribly important meeting right now." "You've got some mail right there. Earrings and a bracelet to match." She looked at him with exasperation, and then gathered up a stack of memorandums and letters, his own envelope atop it. She came out of the press secretary's office 2 minutes later with Howells himself, and Howells said, "You there, Bridges, come in here." "Yes, sir," Jerry said, breezing by the waiting reporters with a grin of triumph. There were 6 men in the room, 3 in military uniform. Howells poked the envelope towards Jerry and snapped, "This note of yours, just what do you think it means?" "You know better than I do, Mr. Howells. I'm just doing my job. I think the public has a right to know about this spaceship that's flying around." His words brought an exclamation from the others. Howells sighed and said, "Mr. Bridges, you don't make it easy for us. It's our opinion that secrecy is essential, that leakage of the story might cause panic. Since you're the only unauthorized person who knows of it, we have 2 choices. One of them is to lock you up." Jerry swallowed hard. "The other is perhaps more practical," Howells said. "You'll be taken into our confidence and allowed to accompany those officials who will be admitted to the landing site. But you will not be allowed to relay the story to the press until such a time as all correspondents are informed. That won't give you a scoop, if that's what you call it, but you'll be an eyewitness. That should be worth something." "It's worth a lot," Jerry said eagerly. "Thanks, Mr. Howells." "Don't thank me. I'm not doing you any personal favor. Now about the landing tonight. You mean the spaceship's coming down?" "Yes. A special foreign ministers' conference was held this morning, and a decision was reached to accept the delegate. Landing instructions are being given at Los Alamos, and the ship will presumably land around midnight tonight. There will be a jet leaving Washington Airport at 9, and you'll be on it. Meanwhile, consider yourself in custody." The USAF jet transport wasn't the only secrecy-shrouded aircraft that took off that evening from Washington Airport, but Jerry Bridges, sitting in the rear seat flanked by 2 sphinx-like Secret Servicemen, knew that he was the only passenger with non-official status aboard. It was only a few minutes past 10 when they arrived at the air base at Los Alamos. The desert sky was cloudy and starless, and powerful searchlights probed the thick cumulus. There were sleek, purring black autos waiting to rush the air passengers to some unnamed destination. They drove for 20 minutes across a flat ribbon of desert road until Jerry sighted what appeared to be a circle of newly erected lights in the middle of nowhere. On the perimeter, official vehicles were parked in orderly rows, and 4 USAF trailer trucks were in evidence, their radar scopes turning slowly. There was activity everywhere, but it was well ordered and unhurried. They had done a good job of keeping the excitement contained. He was allowed to leave the car and stroll unescorted. He tried to talk to some of the scurrying officials, but to no avail. Finally, he contented himself by sitting on the sand, his back against the grill of a staff car, smoking one cigarette after another. As the minutes ticked off, the activity became more frenetic around him. Then the pace slowed, and he knew the appointed moment was approaching. Stillness returned to the desert, and tension was a tangible substance in the night air. The radar scopes spun slowly. The searchlights converged in an intricate pattern. Then the clouds seemed to part. "Here she comes!" a voice shouted, and in a moment the calm was shattered. At first he saw nothing. A faint roar was started in the heavens, and became a growl that increased in volume until even the shouting voices could no longer be heard. Then the criss-crossing lights struck metal, glancing off the gleaming body of a descending object. Larger and larger the object grew, until it assumed the definable shape of a squat silver funnel, falling in a perfect straight line towards the center of the light-ringed area. When it hit, a dust cloud obscured it from sight. A loudspeaker blared out an unintelligible order, but its message was clear. No one moved from their position. Finally, a 3-man team, asbestos-clad, lead-shielded, stepped out from the ring of spectators. They carried Geiger counters on long poles before them. Jerry held his breath as they approached the object. Only when they were yards away did he appreciate its size. It wasn't large, not more than 15 feet in total circumference. One of the 3 men waved a gloved hand. "It's okay," a voice breathed behind him. "No radiation." Slowly, the ring of spectators closed tighter. They were 20 yards from the ship when the voice spoke to them. "Greetings from Venus," it said, and then repeated the phrase in 6 languages. "The ship you see is a Venusian Class 7 interplanetary rocket, built for 1 passenger. It is clear of all radiation, and it is perfectly safe to approach. There is a hatch which may be opened by an automatic lever in the side. Please open this hatch and remove the passenger." An Air Force general whom Jerry couldn't identify stepped forward. He circled the ship warily, and then said something to the others. They came closer, and he touched a small lever on the silvery surface of the funnel. A door slid open. "It's a box," someone said. "A crate. Colligan, Moore, Schaefer, lend a hand here." A trio came forward and hoisted the crate out of the ship. Then the voice spoke again. Jerry deduced that it must have been activated by the decreased load of the ship. "Please open the crate. You will find our delegate within. We trust you will treat him with the courtesy of an official emissary." They set to work on the crate, its grey plastic material giving in readily to the application of their tools. But when it was opened, they stood aside in amazement and consternation. There were a variety of metal pieces packed within, protected by a filmy packing material. "Wait a minute," the general said. "Here's a book." He picked up a grey-bound volume and opened its cover. "Instructions for assembling Delegate," he read aloud. "First, remove all parts and arrange them in the following order. A1, Central Nervous System Housing. A2—" He looked up. "It's an instruction book," he whispered. "We're supposed to build the damn thing." The Delegate, a handsomely constructed robot almost 8 feet tall, was pieced together some 3 hours later by a team of scientists and engineers who seemed to find the Venusian instructions as elementary as a blueprint in an erector set. But simple as the job was, they were obviously impressed by the mechanism they had assembled. It stood impassive until they obeyed the final instruction. "Press button K." They found button K and pressed it. The robot bowed. "Thank you, gentlemen," it said in sweet, unmetallic accents. "Now, if you will please escort me to the meeting place." It wasn't until 3 days after the landing that Jerry Bridges saw the Delegate again, along with a dozen assorted government officials, army officers, and scientists. He was quartered in a Quonset hut in Fort Dix, New Jersey. Then, after 72 frustrating hours, he was escorted by Marine Guard into New York City. No one told him his destination, and it wasn't until he saw the bright strips of light across the face of the United Nations building that he knew where the meeting was to be held. But his greatest surprise was yet to come. The vast auditorium which housed the General Assembly was filled to its capacity, but there were new faces behind the plaques which designated the member nations. He couldn't believe his eyes at first, but as the meeting got under way, he knew that it was true. The highest echelons of the world's governments were represented, even— Jerry gulped at the realization— Nikita Khrushchev himself. It was a summit meeting such as he had never dreamed possible, a summit meeting without benefit of long foreign ministers' debate. And the cause of it all, a placid, highly polished metal robot, was seated blithely at a desk which bore the designation Venus. The robot Delegate stood up. "Gentlemen," it said into the microphone, and the great men at the council tables strained to hear the translator's version through their headphones. "Gentlemen, I thank you for your prompt attention. I come as a delegate from a great neighbor planet in the interests of peace and progress for all the solar system. I come in the belief that peace is the responsibility of individuals, of nations, and now of worlds, and that each is dependent upon the other. I speak to you now through the electronic instrumentation which has been created for me, and I come to offer your planet not merely a threat, a promise, or an easy solution, but a challenge." The council room stirred. "Your Earth satellites have been viewed with interest by the astronomers of our world, and we foresee the day when contact between our planets will be commonplace. As for ourselves, we have hitherto had little desire to explore beyond our realm, being far too occupied with internal matters. But our isolation cannot last in the face of your progress, so we believe that we must take part in your affairs. Here, then, is our challenge. Continue your struggle of ideas, compete with each other for the minds of men, fight your bloodless battles, if you know no other means to attain progress. But do all this without unleashing the terrible forces of power now at your command. Once unleashed, these forces may or may not destroy all that you have gained. But we, the scientists of Venus, promise you this, that on the very day your conflict deteriorates into heedless violence, we will not stand by and let the ugly contagion spread. On that day, we of Venus will act swiftly, mercilessly, and relentlessly to destroy your world completely." Again, the meeting room exploded in a babble of languages. "The vessel which brought me here came as a messenger of peace. But envision it, men of Earth, as a messenger of war. Unstoppable, inexorable, it may return, bearing a different delegate from Venus, a delegate of death, who speaks not in words, but in the explosion of atoms. Think of thousands of such delegates, fired from a vantage point far beyond the reach of your retaliation. This is the promise and the challenge that will hang in your night sky from this moment forward. Look at the planet Venus, men of Earth, and see a goddess of vengeance, poised to wreak its wrath upon those who betray the peace." The delegate sat down. 4 days later, a mysterious explosion rocked the quiet sands of Los Alamos, and the Venus spacecraft was no more. 2 hours after that, the robot delegate, its message delivered, its mission fulfilled, requested to be locked inside a bomb-proof chamber. When the door was opened, the delegate was an exploded ruin. The news flashed with lightning speed over the world, and Jerry Bridges' eyewitness accounts of the incredible event was syndicated throughout the nation. But his sudden celebrity left him vaguely unsatisfied. He tried to explain his feeling to Greta on his first night back in Washington. They were in his apartment, and it was the first time Greta had consented to pay him the visit. "Well, what's bothering you?" Greta pouted. "You've had the biggest story of the year under your byline. I should think you'd be tickled pink." "It's not that," Jerry said moodily. "But ever since I heard the delegate speak, something's been nagging me." "But don't you think he's done good? Don't you think they'll be impressed by what he said?" "I'm not worried about that. I think that damn robot did more for peace than anything that ever come along in his cockeyed world. But still—" Greta snuggled up to him on the sofa. "You worry too much. Don't you ever think of anything else? You should learn to relax. It can be fun." She started to prove it to him, and Jerry responded in the way a normal, healthy male usually does. But in the middle of an embrace he cried out, "Wait a minute!" "What's the matter?" "I just thought of something. Now where the hell did I put my old notebooks?" He got up from the sofa and went scurrying to a closet. From a debris of cardboard boxes he found a worn old leather briefcase, and cackled with delight when he found the yellowed notebooks inside. "What are they?" Greta said. "My old school notebooks, Greta. You'll have to excuse me, but there's something I've got to do right away." "That's all right with me," Greta said haughtily. "I know when I'm not wanted." She took her hat and coat from the hall closet, gave him one last chance to change his mind, and then left. 5 minutes later, Jerry Bridges was calling the airlines. It had been 11 years since Jerry had walked across the campus of Clifton University, heading for the ivy-choked main building. It was remarkable how little had changed, but the students seemed incredibly young. He was winded by the time he asked the pretty girl at the desk where Professor Martin Coltz could be located. "Professor Coltz?" She stuck a pencil to her mouth. "Well, I guess he'd be in the Holland laboratory about now." "Holland laboratory? What's that?" "Oh, I guess that was after your time, wasn't it?" Jerry felt decrepit, but managed to say, "It must be something new since I was here. Where is this place?" He followed her directions and located a fresh-painted building 300 yards from the men's dorm. He met a student at the door who told him that Professor Coltz would be found in the physics department. The room was empty when Jerry entered, except for the single stooped figure vigorously erasing a blackboard. He turned when the door opened. If the students looked younger, Professor Coltz was far older than Jerry remembered. He was a tall man with an unruly confusion of straight grey hair. He blinked when Jerry said, "Hello, Professor. Do you remember me, Jerry Bridges?"
"Of course. I thought of you only yesterday when I saw your name in the papers."
They sat at facing student desks and chatted about old times. But Jerry was impatient to get to the point of his visit, and he blurted out, "Professor Coltz, something's been bothering me. It bothered me from the moment I heard the delegate speak. I didn't know what it was until last night, when I dug out my old college notebooks. Thank God I kept them." Coltz's eyes were suddenly hooded.
"What do you mean, Jerry?"
"There was something about the robots' speech that sounded familiar. I could have sworn I'd heard some of the words before. I couldn't prove anything until I checked my old notes, and here's what I found." He dug into his coat pocket and produced a sheet of paper. He unfolded it and read aloud. "It's my belief that peace is the responsibility of individuals, of nations, and some day even of worlds. Sound familiar, Professor?" Coltz shifted uncomfortably.
"I don't recall every silly thing I said, Jerry."
"But it's an interesting coincidence, isn't it, Professor? These very words were spoken by the delegate from Venus."
"A coincidence?"
"Is it? But I also remember your interest in robotics. I'll never forget that mechanical homing pigeon you constructed, and you've probably learned much more these past 11 years.
"What are you driving at, Jerry?"
"Just this, Professor. I had a little daydream recently, and I want you to hear it. I dreamed about a group of teachers, scientists, and engineers, a group who was suddenly struck by an exciting, incredible idea, a group that worked in the quiet and secrecy of a university on a fantastic scheme to force the idea of peace into the minds of the world's big shots. Does my dream interest you, Professor?"
"Go on."
"Well, I dreamt that this group would secretly launch an Earth satellite of their own and arrange for the nose cone to come down safely at a certain time and place. They would install a marvelous electronic robot within the cone, ready to be assembled. They would beam a radio message to Earth from the cone, seemingly as if it originated from their spaceship. Then, when the robot was assembled, they would speak through it to demand peace for all mankind."
"Jerry, if you do this—"
"You don't have to say it, Professor. I know what you're thinking. I'm a reporter, and my business is to tell the world everything I know. But if I did it, there might not be a world for me to write about, would there? No thanks, Professor. As far as I'm concerned, what I told you was nothing more than a daydream." Jerry braked the convertible to a halt and put his arm around Greta's shoulder. She looked up at the star-filled night and sighed romantically. Jerry pointed. "That one." Greta shivered closer to him. "And to think what that terrible planet can do to us." "Oh, I dunno. Venus is also the goddess of love." He swung his other arm around her, and Venus winked approvingly. The end. Subscribe for more at storiesoffuturespast.substack.com. And now for the next story. Grifters, Asteroid by H.L. Gold. Originally published in Planet Stories, May 1943. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Characteristically, Harvey Ellsworth tried to maintain his dignity, though his parched tongue was almost hanging out. But Joe Mallon, with no dignity to maintain, lurched across the rubbish-strewn patch of land that had been termed a spaceport. When Harvey staggered pontifically into the battered metalloy saloon, the only one on planetoid 42, his tall, gangling partner was already stumbling out, mouthing something incoherent. They met in the doorway, violently. "We're delirious," Joe cried. "It's a mirage." "What is?" asked Harvey through a mouthful of cotton. Joe reeled aside, and Harvey saw what had upset his partner. He stared, speechless for once. In their hectic voyages from planet to planet, the pair of Panacea purveyors had encountered the usual strange life forms, but never had they seen anything like the amazing creature in that colonial saloon. Paying no attention to them, it was carrying a case of liquor in 2 hands, 6 siphons in 2 others, and a broom and dustpan in the remaining pair. The bartender, a big man resembling the plumpish Harvey in build, was leaning negligently on the counter, ordering this impossible being to fill the partly emptied bottles, squeeze fruit juice, and sweep the floor, all of which the native did simultaneously. "Nonsense," Harvey croaked uncertainly. "We have seen enough queer things to know there are always more." He led the way inside. Through thirst-cracked lips he rasped, "Water! Quick!" Without a word, the bartender reached under the counter, brought out 2 glasses of water. The interplanetary conman drank noisily, asked for more, until they had drunk 8 glasses. Meanwhile, the bartender had taken out 8 jiggers and filled them with whiskey. Harvey and Joe were breathing hard from having gulped the water so fast, but they were beginning to revive. They noticed the bartender's impersonal eyes studying them shrewdly. "Strangers, eh?" he asked at last. "Solar salesman, my colonial friend," Harvey answered in his usual lush manner. "We purvey that renowned Martian remedy, La Anago Yergis, the formula for which was recently discovered by ourselves in the ancient ruined city of La Anago. Medical science is unanimous in proclaiming this magic medicine the sole panacea in the entire history of therapeutics." "Yeah," said the bartender disinterestedly, polishing the chaser glasses without washing them. "Where you heading?" "Out of Mars for Ganymede. Our condenser broke down, and we've gone without water for 5 ghastly days." "Got a mechanic around this dumping ground you call a port?" Joe asked. "We did. He came near starving and moved on to Titan. Ships don't land here unless they're in trouble." "Then where's the water leading? We'll fill up and push off." "Mayer takes care of that," replied the saloon owner. "If you gents are finished at the bar, your drinks'll be 40 buckos. Harvey grinned puzzledly. "We didn't take any whiskey." "Might as well. Water's 5 buckos a glass. Liquor's free with every chaser." Harvey's eyes bulged. Joe gulped. That's robbery," the lanky man managed to get out in a thin quaver. The barkeeper shrugged. "When there ain't many customers, you got to make more on each one. Besides—" "Besides nothing," Joe roared, finding his voice again. "You dirty crook, robbing poor spacemen, you—" Harvey nudged him warningly. "Easy, my boy, easy." He turned to the bartender apologetically. "Don't mind my friend. His adrenal glands are sometimes overactive. You were going to say—" The round face on the barkeeper had assumed an aggrieved expression. "Folks are always thinking the other feller's out to do 'em," he said, shaking his head. "Let me explain about the water here. It's bitter as some kinds of sin before it's purified. How to bring it in with buckets and make it sweet. That takes time and labor. What do you think? I was charging feller critters for water just out of devilment? I charge because I gotta." "Friend," said Harvey, taking out a wallet and counting off 8 5-bucko bills, "here is your money. What's fair is fair, and you'll have put a different complexion of what seemed at first to be an unconscionable interjection of a middleman between nature and man's thirst." The saloon man removed his dirty apron and came around the bar. "If that's an apology, I accept it. Now the mayor'll discuss filling your tanks. That's me. I'm also Justice of the Peace, Official Recorder, Fire Chief." "And Chief of Police, no doubt," said Harvey jocosely. "Nope, that's my son, Jed. Angus Johnson's my name. Folks here just call me Chief. I run this town, and run it right. How much water will you need?" Joe estimated quickly. "About 75 litres, if we go on half rations," he answered. He waited apprehensively. "Let's say 10 buckos a litre," the mayor said. "On account of the quantity, I'm able to quote a bargain price. Shucks, boys, it hurts me more to charge for water than it does for you to pay. I just got to, that's all." The mayor gestured to the native, who shuffled out to the tanks with them. The planetoid man worked the pump, while the mayor intently watched the crude level gauge, crying, "Stop!" when it registered the proper amount. Then Johnson rubbed his thumb on his index finger and wetted his lips expectantly. Harvey bravely counted off the bills. He asked, "But what are we to do about replenishing our battery fluid? 10 buckos a litre would be preposterous. We simply can't afford it." Johnson's response almost floored them. "Who said anything about charging you for battery water? You can have all you want for nothing. It's just the purified stuff that comes so high." After giving them directions that would take them to the free water pool, the ponderous factotum of Planetoid 42 shook hands and headed back to the saloon. His 6-armed assistant followed him inside. "Now do you see, my hot-tempered colleague?" said Harvey as he and Joe picked up buckets that hung on the tank. "Johnson, as I saw instantly, is the victim of a difficult environment and must charge accordingly." "Just the same," Joe griped, "paying for water isn't something you can get used to in 10 minutes. In the fragile forest, they soon came across a stream that sprang from the igneous soil and splashed into the small pond whose contents, according to the mayor, was theirs for the asking. They filled their buckets and hauled them to the ship, then returned for more. It was on the 6th trip that Joe caught a glimpse of Jupiter shine on a bright surface off to the left. The figure, 750, with a bucko sign in front of it, was still doing acrobatics inside his skull and keeping a faint suspicion alive in him. So he called Harvey, and they went to investigate. Among the skimpy ground-crawling vines they saw a long, slender mound that was unmistakably a buried pipe. "What's this doing here?" Harvey asked, puzzled. "I thought Johnson had to transport water in pails." "Wonder where it leads to," Joe said uneasily. "It leads to the saloon," said Harvey, his eyes rapidly tracing the pipe back toward the spaceport. "What I am concerned with is where it leads from." 5 minutes later, panting heavily from the unaccustomed exertion of scrambling through the tangle of planetorial undergrowth, they burst into the open, before a clear, sparkling pool. Mutely, Harvey pointed out a pipe end jutting under the water. "I am growing suspicious," he said in a rigidly controlled voice. But Joe was already on his knees, scooping up a handful of water and tasting it. "Sweet!" he snarled. They rushed back to the first pool, where Joe again tasted a sample. His mouth went wry. "Bitter! He uses only one pool, the sweet one. The only thing that needs purifying around here is that blasted mayor's conscience." "The asteroidal pooh-bah has tricked us with a slick come-on," said Harvey slowly. His eyes grew cold. "Joseph, the good-natured artist in me has become a hard and merciless avenger. I shall not rest until we have had the best of this colonial conman. Watch your cues from this point hence." Fists clenched. The two returned to the saloon, but at the door they stopped, and their fists unclenched. "Thought you gents were leaving," the mayor called out, seeing them frozen in the doorway. "Glad you didn't. Now you can meet my son, Jed. Him and me are the whole Earthman population of Johnson City." "You don't need any more," said Harvey, dismayed. Johnson's 8-foot son, topped by a massive roof of sun-bleached hair and held up by a foundation that seemed immovable, had obviously been born and raised in low gravity, for any decent-sized world would have kept him down near the general dimensions of a man. He held out an acre of palm. Harvey studied it worriedly, put his own hand somewhere on it, swallowed as it closed, then breathed again when his fingers were released in 5 units instead of a single compressed one. "Pleased to meet you," piped a voice that had never known a dense atmosphere. The pursuit of vengeance, Harvey realized, had taken a quick and unpleasant turn. Something shrewd was called for. "Joseph," he exclaimed, looking at his partner in alarm, "don't you feel well?" Even before the others could turn to him, Joe's practiced eyes were gently crossing. He sagged against the doorframe, all his features drooping like a bloodhound's. "Bring him in here," Johnson cried. "I mean, get him away. He's coming down with asteroid fever." "Of course," replied Harvey calmly. "Any fool knows the first symptoms of the disease that once scourged the universe." "What do you mean, once?" demanded Johnson. "I come down with it every year, and I ain't hankering to have it in an off-season. Get him out of here." "In good time. He can't be moved immediately." "Then he'll be here for months." Harvey helped Joe to the counter and lifted him up on it. The mayor and his gigantic offspring were cowering across the room, trying to breathe in tiny, uncontaminating gasps. "You'll find everything you want in the back room," Johnson said frantically. "Sulfur-pyridine, mustard plasters, rubs, inhalers, suction cups." "Relics of the past," Harvey stated. "One medication is all modern man requires to combat the dread menace asteroid fever." "What's that?" asked the mayor, without conviction. Instead of replying, Harvey hurried outside to the ungainly second-hand rocket ship in the center of the shabby spaceport. He returned within a few minutes, carrying a bottle. Joe was still stretched out on the bar, panting, his eyes slowly crossing and uncrossing. Harvey lifted the patient's head tenderly, put the bottle to his lips, and tilted it until he was forced to drink. When Joe tried to pull away, Harvey was inexorable. He made his partner drink until most of the liquid was gone. Then he stepped back and waited for the inevitable result. Joe's performance was better than ever. He laid supine for several moments, his face twisted into an expression that seemed doomed to perpetual wryness. Slowly, however, he sat up, and his features straightened out. Are you all right?" asked the mayor anxiously. "Much better," said Joe in a weak voice. "Maybe you need another dose," Harvey suggested. Joe recoiled. "I'm fine now," he cried, and sprang off the bar to prove it. Astonished, Johnson and his son drew closer. They searched Joe's face, and then the mayor timidly felt his pulse. "Well, I'll be hanged," Johnson ejaculated. "La Anago Yergis never fails, my friend," Harvey explained. "By actual test, it conquers asteroid fever in from 4 to 23 minutes, depending on the severity of the attack. Luckily, we caught this one before it grew formidable." The mayor's eyes became clouded mirrors of an inward conflict. "If you don't charge too much," he said warily, "I might think of buying some." "We do not sell this unbelievable remedy," Harvey replied with dignity. "It sells itself." "'Course "I'd expect a considerable reduction if I bought a whole case," said Johnson. "That would be the smallest investment you could make, compared with the vast loss of time and strength the fever involves." "How much?" asked the mayor unhappily. "For you, since you have taken us in so hospitably, a mere 500 buckos." Johnson did not actually stagger back, but he gave the impression of doing so. 400, he offered. "Not a red cent less than 475, Harvey said flatly. "Make it 450, quavered Johnson. "I dislike haggling," said Harvey. The final price, however, was 469 buckos and 50 red cents. Magnanimously, Harvey added, "And we will include, gratis, an elegant bottle-opener, a superb product of Mercurian handicraftsmanship." Johnson stabbed out a warning finger. "No tricks now. I want a taste of that stuff. You're not switching some worthless junk on me." Harvey took a glass from the bar and poured him a generous sample. The mayor sniffed it, grimaced, then threw it down his gullet. The ensuing minute saw a grim battle between a man and his stomach, a battle which the man gradually won. "There ain't no words for that taste," he gulped when it was safe to talk again. "Medicine," Harvey propounded, "should taste like medicine." To Joe he said, "Come, my esteemed colleague, we must perform the sacred task to which we have dedicated ourselves." With Joe stumbling along behind, he left the saloon, crossed the clearing, and entered the ship. As soon as they were inside, Joe dropped his murderous silence and cried, "What kind of dirty trick was that, giving me poison instead of that snake oil?" "That was not poison," Harvey contradicted quietly. "It was La Anago Yergis extract, plus—" "Plus what? Arsenic?" "Now, Joseph, consider my quandary when I came back here to manufacture a specific for all known ailments, with the intention of selling yonder asteroidal tin horn a bill of medical goods, an entire case, mind you. Was I to mix the extract with the water for which we had been swindled to the tune of 10 buckos a litre? Where would our profit have been then? No, I had to use the bitter free water, of course." "But why use it on me?" Joe demanded furiously. Harvey looked reprovingly at his gangling partner. "Did Johnson ask to taste it, or did he not? One must look ahead, Joseph. I had to produce the same medicine that we will now manufacture. Thus, you were a guinea pig for a splendid cause." Okay, Joe said, "but you should have charged him more." "Joseph, I promise you that we shall get back every red cent of which that swindler cheated us, besides whatever other funds or valuables he possesses. We could not be content with less." "Well, we're starting all right," admitted Joe. "How about that thing with 6 arms? He looks like a valuable. Can't we grab him off?" Harvey stopped filling bottles and looked up pensively. "I have every hope of luring away the profitable monstrosity. Apparently you have also surmised the fortune we could make with him. At first I propose to exhibit him on our interplanetary tours with our streamlined panacea. He should be a spectacular attraction for bucolic suckers. Later, a brief period of demonstrating his abilities on the audio-visiphone. Then our triumph. We shall sell him at a stupendous figure to the zoo." Joe was still dazed by that monetary vista when he and Harvey carried the case of medicine to the saloon. The mayor had already cleared a place of honor in the cluttered back room, where he told them to put it down carefully. Then he took the elaborate bottle opener Harvey gave him, reverently uncorked a bottle, and sampled it. It must have been at least as good as the first. He gagged. "That's the stuff, all right," he said, swallowing hard. He counted out the money into Harvey's hand at a moderate rate that precariously balanced between his pleasure at getting the fever remedy and his pain at paying for it. When he glanced out to see the position of Jupiter and asked, "You gents eaten yet? The restaurant's open now." Harvey and Joe looked at each other. They hadn't been thinking about food at all, but suddenly they realized that they were hungry. "It's only water we were short of," Harvey said apprehensively. "We've got rations back at the ship." The mayor grunted. "Powdered concentrates, compressed pap. Suit yourselves. We treat our stomachs better here, and you're welcome to our hospitality." "Your hospitality," said Harvey, "depends on the prices you charge." "Well, if that's what's worrying you, you can stop worrying," answered the mayor promptly. "What's more, the kind of dinner I serve here you can't get anywhere else for any price." Swiftly, Harvey conned the possibilities of being bilked again. He saw none. "Let's take a look at the menu, anyhow, Joe," he said guardedly. Johnson immediately fell into the role of mine host. "Come right in, gents," he invited. "Right into the dining room." He seated them at a table, which a rope tied between posts made more or less private, though nobody else was in the saloon, and there was little chance of company. Genius, the six-armed native, appeared from the dingy kitchen with 2 menus in one hand, 2 glasses of water in another, plus napkins, silverware, a pitcher, plates, saucers, cups, and the cocktails which were on the house. Then he stood by for orders. Harvey and Joe studied the menu critically. The prices were phenomenally low. When they glanced up at Johnson in perplexity, he grinned, bowed, and asked, "Everything satisfactory, gents?" "Quite," said Harvey. "We shall order." For an hour they were served amazing dishes, both fresh and canned, the culinary wealth of this planetoid and all the system, and the service was as extraordinary as the meal itself. With 4 hands, Genius played deftly upon a pair of mellow Venusian viatars, using his other 2 hands for waiting on the table. "We absolutely must purchase this incredible specimen," Harvey whispered excitedly when Johnson and the native were both in the kitchen, attending to the next course. "He would make any society hostess's season a riotous success, which should be worth a great sum to women like Mrs. Van Schuyler Morgan, merely for his hire." "Think of a fast one, fast," Joe agreed. "You're right." "But I dislike having to revise my opinion of a man so often," complained Harvey. "I wish Johnson would stay either swindler or honest merchant. This dinner is worth at least 20 buckos, yet I estimate our check at a mere $1.20 red cents." The mayor's appearance prevented them from continuing the discussion. "It's been a great honor, gents," he said. "Ain't often I have visitors, and I like the best, like you 2 gents." As if on cue, Genius came out and put the check down between Joe and Harvey. Harvey picked it up negligently, but his casual air vanished in a yelp of horror. "What the devil is this?" he shouted. "How do you arrive at this fantastic idiotic figure? 328 buckos!" Johnson didn't answer. Neither did Genius. He simply put on the table, not a finger bowl, but a magnifying glass. With one of his 30 fingers, he pointed politely to the bottom of the menu. Harvey focused on the microscopic print, and his face went pasty with rage. The minute note read, "Services and entertainment, 327 buckos, 80 red cents. "You can go to hell," Joe growled. "We won't pay it." Johnson sighed ponderously. "I was afraid you'd act like that," he said with regret. He pulled a tin badge out of his rear pocket, pinned it on his vest, and twisted his holstered gun into view. "Afraid I'll have to ask the sheriff to take over." Johnson, the sheriff, collected the money, and Johnson, the restaurateur, pocketed it. Meanwhile, Harvey tipped Joe the sign to remain calm. "My friend," he said to the mayor, and his tones took on a schoolmasterish severity, Your long absence from Earth has perhaps made you forget those elements of human wisdom that have entered the folklore of your native planet, such as, for example, it is folly to kill a goose that lays golden eggs, and penny wise is pound foolish. I don't get the connection, objected Johnson. Well, by obliging us to pay such a high price for your dinner, you put out of your reach the chance of profiting from a really substantial deal. My partner and I were prepared to make you a sizable offer for the peculiar creature you call genius, but by reducing our funds the way you have— Who said I wanted to sell him? The mayor interrupted. He rubbed his fingers together and asked disinterestedly, What were you going to offer, anyhow? It doesn't matter any longer, Harvey said with elaborate carelessness. Perhaps you wouldn't have accepted it anyway. That's right, Johnson came back emphatically. But what would your offer have been which I would have turned down? Which one? The one we were going to make, or the one we can make now? Either one. It don't make no difference. Genius is too valuable to sell. Oh, come now, Mr. Johnson, don't tell me no amount of money would tempt you. Nope. But how much did you say? Ah, then you will consider releasing Genius. Well, I'll tell you something, said the mayor confidentially. When you've got one thing, you've got one thing. But when you've got money, it's the same as having a lot of things, because if you've got money, you can buy this and that and this and that and— This and that, concluded Joe. We'll give you 500 buckos. Now, gents, Johnson remonstrated. Why, 600 would hardly— You haven't left us much money, Harvey put in. The mayor frowned. All right, we'll split the difference. Make it 550. Harvey was quick to pay out, for this was a genuine windfall. Then he stood up and admired the astonishing possession he had so inexpensively acquired. I really hate to deprive you of this unique creature, he said to Johnson. I would imagine you would be rather lonely with only a filial mammoth to keep you company. I sure will, Johnson confessed glumly. I got pretty attached to Genius, and I'm going to miss him something awful. Harvey forcibly removed his eyes from the native, who was clearing off the table almost all at once. My friend, he said, we take your only solace, it is true, but in his place we can offer something no less amazing and instructive. The mayor's hand went protectively to his pocket. What is it? He asked, with the suspicion of a man who has seen human nature at its worst and expects nothing better. Joseph, get our most prized belongings from the communications room of the ship, Harvey instructed. To Johnson he explained, You must see the wondrous instrument before its value can be appreciated. My partner will soon have it here for your astonishment. Joe's face grew as glum as Johnson's had been. Oh, Harv, he protested, do we have to sell it? And right when I thought we were getting the key. We must not be selfish, my boy, Harvey said nobly. We have had our chance. Now we must relinquish fate to the hands of a man who might have more success than we. Go, Joseph, bring it here. Unwillingly, Joe turned and shuffled out. On a larger and heavier world than Planetoid 42, Johnson's curiosity would probably have had weight and mass. He was bursting with questions, but he was obviously afraid they would cost him money. For his part, Harvey allowed that curiosity to grow like a Venusian amoeba until Joe came in, lugging a radio. Is that what you were talking about? The mayor snorted. What makes you think I want a radio? I came here to get away from singers and political speech-makers. Do not jump to hasty conclusions, Harvey cautioned. Another word, and I shall refuse you the greatest opportunity any man has ever had, with the sole exceptions of Joseph, myself, and the unfortunate inventor of this absolutely awe-inspiring device. I ain't in the market for a radio, Johnson said stubbornly.
Harvey nodded in relief.
We have attempted to repay our host, Joseph. He has spurned our generosity. We have now the chance to continue our study, which I am positive will soon reward us with the key to an enormous fortune.
Well, that's no plating off our bow, Joe grunted. I'm glad he did turn it down. I hated to give it up after working on it for 3 whole years. He picked up the radio and began walking toward the door.
Now, hold on, the mayor cried. I ain't saying I'll buy, but what is it I'm turning down?
Joe returned and set the instrument down on the bar. His face sorrowful, Harvey fondly stroked the scarred plasticoid cabinet. To make a long story, Mr. Johnson, he said, Joseph and I were among the chosen few who knew the famous Dr. Dean intimately. Just before his tragic death, you will recall, Dean allegedly went insane. He banged his fist on the bar. I have said it before, and I repeat again, that was a malicious lie spread by the doctor's enemies to discredit his greatest invention, this fourth-dimensional radio.
This what?
Johnson blurted out. In simple terms, clarified Harvey, the ingenious doctor discovered that the yawning chasm between the dimensions could be bridged by energy of all quanta. There has never been any question that the inhabitants of the superdimension would be far more civilized than ourselves. Consequently, the man who could tap their knowledge would find himself in possession of a powerful, undreamt-of science. The mayor looked respectfully at the silent box on the bar. And this thing gets broadcast from the fourth dimension. It does, Mr. Johnson. Only charlatans like those who envied Dr. Dean's magnificent accomplishments could deny that fact. The mayor put his hands in his pockets, unswivelled one hip, and stared thoughtfully at the battered cabinet.
Well, let's say it picks up fourth-dimensional broadcasts, he conceded. But how could you understand what they're saying? Folks up there wouldn't talk our language.
Again, Harvey smashed his fist down.
Do you dare to repeat that scurvy lie that broke Dean's spirit and drove him to suicide?
Johnson recoiled.
No, of course not. I mean, being up here, I naturally couldn't get all the details.
Naturally, Harvey agreed, mollified. I'm sorry I lost my temper. But it is a matter of record that the doctor proved the broadcasts emanating from the superdimension were in English. Why should that be so difficult to believe? Is it impossible that at one time there was communication between the dimensions, that the super beings admired our language and adopted it in all its beauty, adding it to their own hyper-scientific trimmings?
Why, I don't know, Johnson said in confusion. For 3 years, Joseph and I lost sleep and hair trying to detect the simple key that would translate the somewhat metamorphosed broadcasts into our primitive English. It eluded us. Even the doctor failed, but that was understandable. A sensitive soul like his could stand only so much, and the combination of ridicule and failure to solve the mystery caused him to take his own life.
Johnson winced.
Is that what you want to unload on me?
For a very good reason, sir. Patience is the virtue that will be rewarded with the key to those fourth-dimensional broadcasts. A man who could devote his life to improving this lonely worldlet is obviously a person with unusual patience.
Yeah, the mayor said grudgingly. I ain't exactly flighty.
Therefore, you are the man who could unravel the problem. Johnson asked sceptically,
How about a sample first?
Harvey turned a knob on the face of the scarred radio. After several squeals of spatial figures, a smooth voice began.
There are ominous plages of Moby Haylegs in Sominard and which Haug Reisman are not to be conferred Miss establishment in either or both Haggis and by all means. This does not refly on the brother man. Nat or Mirsfield sages are denuded by this ocephalico. Harvey switched off the set determinedly. Wait a minute, Johnson begged. I almost got it then. I dislike being commercial, said Harvey, but this astounding device still belongs to us. Would we not be foolish to let you discover the clue before purchasing the right to do so? The mayor nodded indecisively, looking at the radio with agonizing longing. How much do you want? He asked unhappily. 1,000 buckos, and no haggling. I am not in the mood. Johnson opened his mouth to argue, then, seeing Harvey's set features, paid with the worst possible grace. Don't you think we ought to tell him about the batteries, Harv? Joe asked. What about the batteries? Demanded Johnson with deadly calm. A very small matter, Harvey said airily. You see, we have been analyzing these broadcasts for 3 years. In that time, of course, the batteries are bound to weaken. I estimate these should last not less than 1 terrestrial month, at the very least. What do I do then? Harvey shrugged. Special batteries are required, which I see Joseph has by chance brought along. For the batteries, the only ones of their kind left in the system, I ask only what they cost. 199 buckos, no more, and, on the other hand, no less. Johnson was breathing hard, and his hand hovered dangerously near his gun, but he paid the amount Harvey wanted. Moreover, he actually shook hands when the two panacea purveyors collected their 6-armed prize and said good-bye. Before they were outside, however, he had turned on the radio and was listening tensely to a woman's highly cultured, though rather angry voice, saying, "Oh, you Hannaforger, old beast hagus animot, if you rue mounted, how do you resplench a pure woman to answer go samak?" "I'll get it," they heard Johnson mutter. Then the sound of giant feet crossing the barroom floor reached their ears, and a shrill question, "What's that, Papa?" "A fortune, Jed. Those fakers are damned fools selling us a thing like—" Joe gazed at Harvey admiringly. "Another one sold? Harv, that spiel pulls him in like an ether storm." Together with a remarkable planetoid man, they reached the ship. Above them, dark tumbling shapes blotted out the stars and silently moved on. Joe opened the gangway door. "Come on in, pal," he said to Genius. "We're shoving off." The planetoid man grinned foolishly. "Can't go along with you," he said with an apologetic manner. "I'd like to, but pressure flatten me out if I go." "What in solar blazes are you talking about?" Harvey asked. "I grew up on planetoid," Genius explained. "On big planet. Too much pressure for me." The two salesmen looked narrowly at each other. "Did Johnson know that when he sold you?" Joe snarled. "Oh, sure." The silly grin became wider than ever. "People from Earth buy me lots of times. I never leave planetoid, though." "Joseph," Harvey said ominously, "that slick colonist has put one over upon us. What is our customary procedure in that event?" "We tear him apart," Joe replied between his teeth. "Not Mr. Johnson," advised Genius. "Have gun and a badge. He shoot you first, and then lock you up in prison." Harvey paused, his ominous air vanishing. "True. There is also the fact, Joseph, that when he discovers the scrambled rectifier in the radio we sold him, he will have been paid back in full for his regrettable dishonesty." Unwillingly, Joe agreed. While Genius retreated to a safe distance, they entered the ship and blasted off. Within a few minutes,
The automatic steering pilot had maneuvered them above the plane of the asteroid belt. "I got kind of dizzy," Joe said. "There were so many deals back and forth. How much did we make on the sucker?" "A goodly amount, I'd wager," Harvey responded. He took out a pencil and paper. "Medicine, 469.50. Radio, 1,000. Batteries, 199. Total, let's see, 1,668 buckos and 50 red cents. A goodly sum, as I told you." He emptied his pockets of money, spread it out on the astrogation table, and began counting. Finished, he looked up, troubled. "How much did we have when we landed, Joseph?" "Exactly 1,668 buckos," Joe answered promptly. "I can't understand it," said Harvey. "Instead of double our capital, we now have only 1,668 buckos and 50 red cents. Feverishly he returned to his pencil and paper. "Drinking water, 790. Battery water, free. Meal, 328. Planetoid man, 550. Total, 1,668 buckos." He stared at the figures. "We paid out almost as much as we took in," he said bitterly. "Despite our intensive effort, we made the absurd sum of 50 red cents." "Why, the dirty crook!" Joe growled. But after a few moments of sad reflection, Harvey became philosophical. "Perhaps, Joseph, we are more fortunate than we realized. We were, after all, completely in Johnson's power. The more I ponder, the more I believe we were lucky to escape. And, anyhow, we did make 50 red cents on the swindler. A moral victory, my boy." Joe, who had been sunk despairingly into a chair, now stood up slowly and asked, "Remember that bottle opener we gave him?" "Certainly," Harvey explained. "What about it?" "How much did it cost us?" Harvey's eyebrows puckered. Suddenly he started laughing. "You're right, Joseph. We paid 46 red cents for it on Venus. So after all that transacting of business, we made 4 red cents. 4 red cents, hell!" Joe snapped. "That was the sales tax." He glared. Then a smile lifted his mouth. "You remember those yokels on Mars's flatlands and the way they worshipped gold?" "Gold bricks," Harvey said succinctly. Grinning, Joe set the robot controls for Mars. The end. To help save more of the forgotten stories of futures past, visit storiesoffuturespast.substack.com/about.